ahead and get started with some of the logistics stuff before we're live on the internet. My name is Professor Jennifer Dill. I'm faculty in Urban Studies and Planning, and along with my colleagues, Professor John Glebe, also in Urban Studies and Planning, and Professor Miguel Figliozzi, who must be on his way over here, over in Civil Engineering. We are the instructors for this as it's offered as a course. Oh, I am live now, so let me make sure my microphone is on. But it's also a seminar that's open to the public. I know a lot of you are not students or you're not enrolled in this as a class. But since it is the first week of the term, I have some logistics that are course related that I need to go over. I've been handing out copies of the syllabus to the students who have raised their hand and identified themselves to me. Please read this carefully. I believe all of your questions will be answered in here about attendance, and if you want to watch online, what do you need to do, et cetera, et cetera. Please read it carefully front and back about the requirements. We've had some miscommunications in the past with students, and they get upset in the end when they didn't read the syllabus carefully. One of the key things in the course is attendance. We have this attendance sheet. We send it around the room. If you're a student, check your name off. If you're not listed on here, write your name down. Make sure you have been registered. And make sure that this sheet gets back to one of the instructors, which would be myself, John Glebe, or Miguel Figliozzi, who just walked in. So Miguel Figliozzi is the instructor of record if you're taking this as a civil engineering course. John Glebe and me are the ones if you're taking this as an urban studies and planning course. So that's who you would turn in your written assignment to at the end of the term as well, which is another important thing not to forget. So the important things that you need to know if you're taking this as a class, you need to be attending the seminar. There is an option for doing that on the web. It's explained in the syllabus, but the attendance sheet, if you're here in person, is what you need to make sure that you sign off on. Then we also want you to be asking questions, paying attention and asking questions. So that is also part of your grade, asking a question of the speaker. Sometimes, particularly on a very interesting topic, like I'm sure we'll have today, we don't have time for everyone in the room to be asking their questions verbally, in which case write it down on a piece of paper and hand it to whichever instructor has this sign-in sheet. And it'll get recorded that way. And then even if you do ask it verbally, please check in with the instructor at the end to make sure that we got it marked down, particularly at the beginning of the quarter before we've learned your names. And then finally, there is a written assignment that's due the Tuesday after the last course. It's explained in here. That's if you're taking the class for a grade. So I think I've covered everything in terms of the logistics. Without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker, starting out the term. So today we have with us Åsa Bergman, who has just finished her master's degree here at Portland State University in Urban and Regional Planning. She's continuing on doing some research here in travel demand modeling and other topics. And she's going to be talking about some work she's been doing on access to the West Commuter Rail. Turn it over to you.
Thank you.
And is your microphone on?
Well, how do I know if my microphone is on?
Well,
maybe.
It's not, for sure. I know that.
Does it seem to be on?
It's good.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. One thing I forgot. I can't believe I forgot one thing.
Don't you normally do a round?
Do you want to know who? We'll do introductions if you want.
There are quite a few people here, though.
Yeah, sometimes we skip it.
Oh, I can,
because of timing.
I'll get to know you later.
Actually, maybe, I'm sorry, since it's the first day of the term, maybe we will go around and do introductions. But the other thing I forgot was we do webcast these seminars, so anyone in the world can be watching on the web, which means when we get to the point where we ask questions, you need to use the microphone so the people watching on the web can hear your questions. So hopefully there's a microphone on your desk. Hold the touch button, keep the red light lit while you're asking the question so that the people on the web can hear you. If there is no microphone or if it's not working, we'll come around with the portable one to get you. And if you start asking your question without the microphone, I'm going to interrupt you and say, could you please use the microphone? So please remember to do that. Let's do a quick round of introductions. Thank you for reminding me. And particularly so we can start learning the students in the room. So just your name and your affiliation. And we're going to cover this narrow side of the room, and we'll do the larger side of the room. And this is a good chance to practice using the microphone if it works.
I'm Seth Gallant. I'm a planning consultant with URS here in town.
Jeff Owen, bicycle pedestrian coordinator for City of Wilsonville Smart Transit.
Joe Broach, a PhD student in urban studies here at PSU.
John Cullerton with URS Transportation Project Manager. Oh, Project Manager.
Cindy Pedersen with Metro.
Looks like yours may not be working past that.
Shane Boyd for Urban Studies.
William Farley, graduate student, PSU.
John Glebe, faculty member, Urban Studies and Planning.
I'm Dan Marchand. I'm a TriMet bus planner and a MERP alum.
Colin Marr, also with TriMet, MERP alum.
Christy Gladhill, Metro.
Hong Wei. Miguel Figliassi, civil engineering faculty.
Jian Hongye, postdoctoral in urban studies and planning.
Elizabeth Edgar, civil undergrad.
Kyung Kim, PhD student at PSU.
April Cutter, urban and regional planning student.
John Mackler, staff with OTREC.
I'm Arlie Adkins, a PhD student in urban studies.
Higgins, MERP student, PSU.
Alex Pagazzi, civil grad student.
Catherine Collins, Homemakers of Oregon.
Nathan McNeil, a researcher at Center for Transportation Studies here at PSU.
Chase, community development graduate working on post-bac studies.
Scott Kelly, professional civil engineer.
Dan Spolstra, civil undergrad.
Quentin Doxey, post-bachelor.
Chrissy Hostetler, second year MERP student, PSU.
Michelle Van Tyen, second year PSU MERP student.
Nick Falbo, second year MERP.
Bud Reef, Metro.
Linzhou, City of Portland.
Xi Yang, first year master student in MS program.
Tabitha Boschetti, unemployed, recent biography graduate. Anyone looking?
Andrew Kelman, Transportation Studies Certificate Program.
Henry Underwood, Geography graduate student.
Hadi Yamin, Transportation Engineer. I am also looking for a job.
Okay, so thank you all. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Osa. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the introductions, everyone. All right. So I think I'll be talking for about 30 minutes, and we can take questions after, or I'm also open to questions during, and if so, then we'll go on for a little bit longer. Let's see. Oh, Jennifer, one thing I actually forgot to ask is there a clicker? Then I'll try to go with that. I'll just be walking back and forth a bit. Okay, so as you may all guess by now, this study is about modeling, statistically modeling access mode choice to the Westside Express Service commuter rail, which I will soon show on a map where it is in the Portland region. And, well, the outline is such. I'll just say a few words about this research, then go through talking about the data and analysis method, and try and get to the findings fairly quickly. So, well, actually, before I do this, about this research, I did this. This is a student paper that I wrote during my last couple of terms in the Urban and Regional Planning program, because my specialization in the program was transportation, and I had taken several courses in different types of transportation modeling, specifically discrete choice modeling, and I wanted to basically explore some data and do a study on my own, and also see if there was a chance that I could get it published. So I've actually submitted it. The paper is submitted to the Journal of Public Transportation for consideration. We'll have yet to see if they accept it. I got the data for my study from TriMet. So I always like to say thanks to Yvonne Lyon, Joe Recker, and Virginia Shank, who all helped me and answered many of my questions about the data. And of course, my supervisor on this study was Dr. Strathman, and also assisting me with the paper and many discrete choice modeling questions was Dr. John Levy. So, starting sort of broadly to get you thinking about access modes to transit. We have WES here, but I will show it on a greater system map in a little bit. Well, what influence how you choose how to get to a transit? There are a whole list, and I'm sure you can think of even more factors. Cost of the access mode and your own income. It could be car availability, parking provisions at the station where you need to board, transit availability. Can you get to your boarding station by bus, for example? The distance to the transit stop and how much time you have in the morning. As I will soon tell you, WES is a commuter rail, so people are getting to work, and how much time do they have? Also, the number of transfers required can help decide which mode you take. Also, the walk route environment, if you're planning to walk. There can be other characteristics that are more individual or demographic of sense, like your family type, age and gender, personal preferences, weather. I'm sure you can come up with a much longer list. But what studies of mode choice and access mode choice tend to find is that riders make trade-offs between several of these factors, and then also with time we form habits for which modes we choose. But why does it matter, and why do you need to study this? Well, some things that I thought of was, get it all up here. 3 kind of important factors is that if you know the preferences of your riders, that can actually, and you know them better, or detailed scale, that can help inform targeted marketing to different ridership groups or potential ridership groups. It's also possible that the access mode choice can help explain which main mode choice you make. And also, as I will get to right now, WES is a suburban commuter rail, and suburban commuter rail riders may differ from other transit riders. There can be more reasons to think about. But yeah, now to the data and about WES. So WES is, I'm sure most of you are familiar with WES, but it's a commuter rail line running between the Beaverton Transit Center and Wilsonville on the western side of Portland. It's 14 miles long and runs in the AM and PM peak. And it opened in 2009, and after only 6 months, TriMet had some funding to do a survey, an onboard survey of their riders to get to know them a bit more, and also to try and see if they could improve marketing or anything else to increase ridership, because ridership, as we all know, was kind of low in the beginning and is still relatively low compared to expectations. So I know you probably can't read this all too well, but this is the survey that TriMet did that then was the basis for my data set that I used in the analysis. Wait, is there a laser pointer?
The mouse, it will show up on the screen, which is what his webcast. So if you
Oh.
the laser pointer, the web.
Well, that will work. they asked typical questions about, where was your origin, where were you going to? But interestingly, for my study, or it enabled my study, they also asked questions about how did you access the station where you boarded your West train, and also several questions about West itself, sort of attribute ratings. For example, an interesting question was, before West existed, how did you make this trip? Did you drive the whole way? Did you take buses? Because there were buses going pretty much the alignment that West is now, and other modes. And then some more open-ended questions like, what do you like? What do you like best or most about West? And what do you like least? You also had a Likert scale here of 1 to 5, where there were statements about West that people got to, indicate their level of agreement or disagreement with. For example, writing West saves me money, or writing West is part of my commitment to sustainable lifestyle. What else do we have? West is on time. West means that I have time to do what I want rather to be driving, for example. They also collected a few basic sociodemographic information, such as male, female, ethnic background, and income in 3 broad income categories. And this came to be the basis then for my access mode study, where I decided to study 6 distinct access modes, which were car, meaning you park and ride, or drop off, bus, light rail, walk and bike. And there were also a few combinations of modes, because, for example, somebody may have walked a fair distance, then taken the bus, and then eventually accessed MAX. But since the large majority and more of the respondents had only given one mode, I only used the observations where it was clear that they had one major access mode, because no other combinations of mode formed a large enough group for me to include it in the study. Let's see. Okay. This is actually supposed to say observed rather than findings, because this is what TriMet found and not what I necessarily found. But the original data set had 946 observations, and in the process of cleaning the data to be able to use it for my modeling, I actually removed about 1/5 of the responses that for different reasons weren't suitable. So I ended up with 732 observations. And we see that, so these are the access modes split to the commuter rail. If you're starting from home, whereas if you're starting from a non-home origin, for example, the workplace. And, well, they speak for themselves in a way, but I can point out that compared to other commuter rail studies, access studies that I looked at during this work, I found that especially the walk and bus access mode shares were larger appear to be larger for West than what they find in many other commuter rail studies. Because in many conventional commuter rail, you often find that car may be a dominant access mode. What else do we have? Of course, in the non-home origins, you'll find that car is almost never available, because if you're going from work and back to the station to get home, you typically don't have a car available. Yes, and this map could have been a bit earlier, but here it is. Here's TriMet's system map of where West is located. So it's here. And the travel time is expected to be 27 minutes for the whole line. But then you can also show this map, which actually shows better how long West actually is and how it actually differs from other light rail lines. So in this map, these gray lines are actually the other light rail lines, the other MAX lines. And I've made Wes black here. And so you can see, although I don't know how clearly it does show up on this map, the station spacing is much wider, and also the line itself is just much longer. And here's the starting points or the origins of the respondents in my study. You know, it's fairly distributed along the West Corridor, but also actually a lot traveling from further away. So access modes, I'm not going to go through this all in detail, but you can look at it later if you want to. Access modes, of course, as you'd expect, varied by station. For example, here, clearly Beaverton stands out. The green bar there is light rail, because Max's Beaverton is the only station that actually has light rail. And we also see that, let's see, other things I was going to mention here. Walk, Hall, and Nimbus and Tualatin have big portions of walking, and Wilsonville has a lot of bus, but Wilsonville also has plenty of car access. And this here shows observed access modes by distance, because, as you know, depending on how long you need to go to get how far you need to go to the station, there are different modes that are attractive at different distances. And so the orange line here is walk, and you clearly see how actually at West it really dominates at over 70% of the mode share for distances below half a mile. But from 1 mile and up, it starts to peter off. But that's still further longer walk access than we often see in urban, for example, light rail mode access studies. Bus really becomes dominant when walk starts to peter off. And on light rail, the green line there, we really see an increase at much longer distances. Another thing I wanted to show too was observed access travel times. And the blue bars here are showing median travel times, and red ones are showing max ones. And I can tell you right away if you wonder that the 120-minute bus ride, that was just a couple of observations, but they were still valid. Car and drop-off are fairly similar. About 5 to 7 minutes is a typical travel time. Walk is about 8 minutes. People typically bike a bit further. LRT access is about 20 minutes median travel time. And then bus actually have the longest median travel time. Let's see here.
The access time is just the time to get to the light rail system?
I think you need to use the microphone.
The access time is just the time to get to the light rail system?
It's the access time to get from your origin, where you start, whether it's at home or work, to the West station. Yeah, that's what the access modes are about. You can also look at access mode by income, and access mode by income, and see that it's fairly similar, although as you will see in the findings, bus has its largest share of riders among the low income group of below 40,000 annual household income. Walk is actually somewhat bigger in the median or sort of mid-level household income group. And maybe as expected, car has its largest share of riders in the high income group. But these groups, of course, are somewhat coarse, given that there were only 3, that in the survey they only recorded 3 different groups. Now to the analysis. So, as I mentioned earlier, I used a statistical modeling method called discrete choice modeling, or logic choice modeling actually, to model these access choices. And to explain that briefly, I'm actually going to have to skip to a PDF, because there were some formulas that didn't quite transfer. there are still some problems on this formula on the screen, unfortunately. But I started out with so first of all, discrete choice modeling is a technique where you estimate the probabilities of choosing a certain access mode based on an estimated utility or usefulness or worth to the individual decision maker of using that particular mode. And that depends on several things. For example, well, it depends on which mode they actually chose, which we have information about, and then we put together a choice set of modes they could have chosen if they were available to them, and also characteristics of the individual decision maker, the trip context, and also the modes themselves. And shortly, I'm showing it here. So the multinomial logit model, which I started with, in that you calculate the probability, which is p there. Probability of choosing a certain mode is calculated as the exponentiated utility of that mode divided by the sum of the exponentiated utilities of all the modes. I'm seeing a different thing here on the screen. But then the nested logit model, which is the one I eventually settled for, because it explained my data better. You add one more level, and you sort of start to see a nest structure, which I will soon show you, where the probability of choosing a mode isn't any longer just a ratio of the utility of that mode and all the modes together, but it's actually the probability that a certain mode is going to be in a nest, and a nest is like a group of modes, times the probability, first, it's the probability that a mode, probability of choosing a mode given that you are in that nest, and multiplied with the probability of being in that nest. And it can be expanded like so, and it will soon become clearer. Let's see if I can show the next one here too. Yeah, I'll have to show the next one as a PDF as well. So we use different variables, like the ones I mentioned earlier about a whole list of factors that can influence your access mode choice. It can be the access trip itself, station area feature, rider characteristics, and West attribute ratings are the variables that I used. And in the end, you end up with a utility function, which is shown here, which is a linear function where you enter, sort of the utility of a certain mode is all these attributes, which are the x's here. All the attributes, it can be travel time, it can be gender, whatever you find to be statistically significant, times certain coefficients on those variables that show if you get positive or negative utility out of, for example, travel time. And sort of the bottom line here is that you see the relative importance of different attributes to decision makers and trade-offs they're willing to make. And if it isn't crystal clear, it will soon become more obvious when I actually show the results. So here's the nested model structure that I was talking about. But this is actually a trial and error method that you do to see when do you get a better statistical fit or statistical results by trying to group different modes and different levels. And for this model, we actually found that, and if modes are in the same nest, it means that they are more similar in the sense that, well, in the statistical sense, it's because they share more unexplained variance. But it also means that it can be interpreted as saying that they are closer substitutes. So we found that drop-off doesn't really fit with any other mode. Observations there are just different. Carbus and LRT share a lot of unexplained variance. And on the other branch here, bike and walk, the non-motorized modes, were fairly similar. Now, I will have to go back to that PowerPoint again. Let's see. Excuse me. Now we're back. Okay. So here you see some model results that I've grouped under individual and trip characteristics. And I'll start by saying that this is just a way of presenting it, saying that those who have a certain attributes are more likely to access West by a certain mode. You could also argue in many cases that those who access West by a certain mode are more likely to hold certain values or have some attributes. It is up to interpretation. But as you see here, we found that those who hold employer-sponsored transit passes, which was roughly a third of West riders, are actually more likely to access West by car. Those who used to drive the entire trip before West existed, we found some sort of inertia or captivity effect there where they're more likely to access West by car now, even though they don't drive all the way. As is found in many studies, males were more likely to bike. But for any bike findings, I will say that the number of observed bikers was really small. It was just below 40. And so, definitely one should be cautious with making too heavy interpretations by the bike findings. Also, those who have low income or in the low income group were more likely to access West by bus. And not surprisingly, those who start the trip at home were more likely to be dropped off. Then we have a category I call attitudes and attributes. And these go back to, if you remember on the questionnaire I showed you, they had West's attributes and attitude questions and statements that people could agree with. And I tried a great number of those variables, but a lot of the times things did not come out significant because the group of West riders were very enthusiastic, which definitely showed in their responses, because they generally rated West and everything about it fairly high. And so, but there was some variance, and actually managed to put in the model that those who mentioned comfort as a reason for liking West and reason for riding West were actually more likely to access it by car or light rail. Also, those who agreed with the statement that riding West is my commitment to sustainable lifestyle, that statement was found more among bikers or bicyclists, which was actually a bit interesting because you could have expected that you'd find that to be significant for any non-motorized modes, for example, pedestrians as well. Then we have a third group, which is station area factors. And here, this is all really what one would expect. For example, stations with more car parking were more likely to have people arriving by car. Stations with more bus lines were more likely to have people arriving by bus. And also, I wanted to have some type of walk environment or land use urban design variable. But ideally, I should have had something much more refined, like street connectivity. But given limitations, I tried population density, and actually did find that to be significant. So areas with higher population density within 1 mile of the station showed higher likeliness for walking to those stations. And then, one thing that some of you are familiar with that we often do in this type of modeling is to estimate the value of time, meaning how much people would be willing to pay to, for example, avoid travel costs or avoid longer travel times. And this is typically expressed as a value of, in the wage rate, dollars per hour. In this model, we found generally very low values of time compared to what you typically expect. For example, so first of all, I can say that the parameters are expected to be negative on all of these variables. For example, people don't like incurring more costs for traveling, or people get negative utility from it. Also, in-vehicle travel time or travel time for both motorized and non-motorized modes is, well, you want to keep that as short as possible as well. And also, walk time and initial wait and transfer wait times for those taking transit should also be negative because people are expected to want to minimize their wait time. But typically on, let's see, yeah, in full mode choice models where you actually estimate the main mode and not just the axis mode, you typically find that for motorized modes, you'd have a 2 to 3 times higher, let's see. Yes, sorry, I got this wrong here. The motorized in-vehicle value of time is $3.20 here per hour, but typically you expect that to be a quarter to half of an hourly wage rate. So if an hourly wage rate would be $20, you'd expect in a full mode choice model to see a value of about $10 there, for example. So clearly this model is low. Another thing I can point out is that you also expect the out-of-vehicle travel time to be more onerous and therefore have a higher value of time on that than the in-vehicle travel time, because once you're in your vehicle or on your bike, whatever it is, that's considered to be more comfortable and less onerous. However, there were kind of big problems with that in this model because, as you can see, the value of time for these out-of-vehicle travel times, as I call them here, is just $1.77, which is actually lower than the travel time, in-vehicle travel time values of time. And that's opposite to what you would expect. And we tried a grand number of combinations to see if we could solve this or tease out what the problem was, but did not get to anything satisfactory. But one major thing to point out is that this is, again, an axis mode choice model, and there haven't been, axis modes haven't been studied that much in these type of models. So it is likely, there are two things that are likely. One, all the people studied here have already committed to taking transit because we already know West is their main mode. And so, but in full mode choice models where you compare, say, rail to car to bus, you likely have much higher values of time because you have, for example, all the automobile folks in there. Whereas here, you could say that these people already have lower values of time as value of time is defined because they're taking transit, which is a slower mode. But also there has been one other study I could find that also found that there were they found lower values of time for, in that case, egress modes, so getting from the station to your final destination. They also found lower values of time for that than their regional full choice model. But yeah, this is definitely something where I would like to see more axis mode studies that use the same type of modeling technique to compare and see if there are anomalies here or if you actually should expect to find much lower values of time for axis modes. That should be it. Now I'm going to mention a few things that came up and a few conclusions, tentative, suggested conclusions even, of the work. So I looked at, in my literature review part, I looked at first at other commuter rail lines and studies of them in the US. One big difference with West potentially is, of course, that whereas many regions that have commuter rail will have several lines, so it's sort of a network of commuter rail lines, West is, of course, just a single commuter rail line. And it's also a suburb-to-suburb commuter rail line, so it never actually, as we know, it never connects you directly to the downtown, which commuter rail typically does. So there are many reasons why West may differ in many ways from other places. But I found a few similarities to other commuter rail lines, namely that both station area factors, such as a number of bus lines, how much car parking there is, were definitely linked to access mode choice in other studies as well. So that was a similarity. Something that they found in many other commuter rail line access studies too is that people seem to be willing to walk long. If they walk, they're willing to walk longer than people you typically see to urban transit like light rail. There's actually one main difference that I could find, although there might be more. It's just that there isn't that many commuter rail studies, so it's hard to know how to compare to. But what we definitely found was that, bus and walk are more prominent access modes, and also in the logit choice model, we found that people seem to have a higher willingness to walk longer distances and take the bus for longer time than typically find in other commuter rail studies. And you can, of course, speculate why that is. As I said, West is and at the time of the survey, it had only operated for 6 months and definitely had a very enthusiastic group of writers who wanted to see it continue and not be cut off or anything. And chances are that may have been reflected in people's survey responses. So that can have been one bias, that they wanted to only say good things about West. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that second point here, which is one reason or one possible explanation for why we see that bus and walk are much more prominent access modes than in many other commuter rail studies could be this fact that West is just one single line, and it does attach to the light rail network, and so chances are that people are actually using West more as they would any other MAX line rather than as a commuter rail, and it therefore attracts a little bit different mentality and different type of people. So that's one possible explanation. It could also be that the walk environment, for example, the walk environment in the West Corridor might be better than in many other suburban settings, but all those are speculations that one would have to look into more closely. And another finding, as I mentioned, was that we find much lower values of time, and that would have to be looked into further with other studies of commuter rail lines. Then I have a couple of considerations here. So there are several improvements, of course, that could be done. One is that one major thing that TriMet actually didn't do in this survey was that they didn't ask about car ownership. And that is typically something you really want to be able to, because that tends to explain a lot, what access mode choice people are going to consider. And you typically you want to know if car was available to the decision maker. I worked around that a little bit here, and I also had other studies from the West Corridor before it was West, when it was just buses, showing that roughly when they had actually asked about car ownership on these bus surveys, showing that somewhere around 90-95% of riders actually did own a car. They just weren't using it right then. So I could assume a very high car ownership level. But that auto and bike availability would be good to have as a question in a survey. And then it would be interesting to know more about reliability of both the access mode and the main mode. For example, how reliable somebody considers a certain mode to be will probably have an impact on whether they consider to use that mode or not. Some people may consider walking to be the most reliable because if you know your route, you kind of know how long it's going to take, and at least in this climate, you don't expect too many variations. But that may vary between people too. Others may find car is the most reliable, and some type of measure of that would have been very interesting to study. Also, it would be good to have a refined transit network, because as I mentioned earlier in the values of time, when I had transfer time, wait time, etc., we were using zonal data from the regional, from Metro's travel demand model. And from there, from those skims there, you can actually get, for example, average bus travel times between two different transportation zones, as well as skims on estimated wait time, etc. But chances are that that's on a two aggregate level. And for a study like this, you would want some point-to-point estimations of, okay, which bus stop is this person's origin closest to, and how long is that walk time actually going to be, instead of using zonal data. Let's see. Although I should actually also mention that, so that would be good for the transit network, but for bike and walk times, I actually had access to the bike model network that Joe Broach developed together with John Glebe. And that is a much more fine detailed network than the typical highway network, for example. And you actually, so the inputs that I used there for walk and bike times were pretty refined, because they actually used a type of utility that Joe would have to explain further, but you actually can take into account things like maybe high volume traffic roads, or if there's a steep hill, and you can take that into account for actual walk and bike times. So that was very useful, but it would have been great to have something more refined like that for transit too, because that may be part of the explanation why we saw such low values of travel time. And then, other than improving inputs, further research or next steps could definitely would need to be an expansion of this study, because as you know, by only studying the West riders, we only find out about the West riders, and we don't know what people think who are maybe considering West but not yet choosing it, so the potential riders. And that's, of course, something that is of great interest to TriMet if they want to try to increase their ridership. So doing, for example, a joint access, main mode, and egress study, egress being, again, that last leg of your trip to your destination, that would be very interesting. And you would then model different main modes, for example, West, but you would also have maybe light rail, bus, other modes. And you could see different values of time or different categories, and also what people are trading off and what they're actually willing to do to access the different modes. And this is similar to that. It would be a full mode choice model including West, but maybe or maybe not including the access modes. That's it. Yeah.
So let's
now we can take questions.
Questions, and remember to use your microphone. If it's not working, I'll try to come around with the portable mic. Yes.
Your list of factors didn't include end-of-trip facilities or characteristics as part of someone's decision for their access mode. It comes to mind that maybe someone with a long end-of-trip to their destination might be less willing to put up with a long trip to get on the West.
Yes.
Did you have data that you might be able to analyze that? Is that a common feature of these types of studies?
And so by that you mean if I had information on their egress trip?
Yeah, like if you knew they were going to take the bus from the West Station to their workplace,
yeah, I see
maybe
what you
they're
mean.
not willing to put up with another long bus
Yes.
ride at the front end.
I mean, when people do these joint access and egress mode studies, you often find that, indeed, when people make the decision in the first place, if they're going to use a certain mode, they, of course, don't only look at how they're going to get to the station from their home. They also want to know, is it reasonable on the other side when I get off the train? But in this case, I actually chose, I actually chose not to look at egress modes because it wasn't actually observed in the survey. There was not observed data. There was a question in there about how will you get to your final destination once you get off the train. But that is only, people's reports in beforehand, and we don't really know if they did. So that's why I couldn't include anything about egress in the study. Jennifer, can you help me decide? Okay.
I'm just wondering if so you didn't consider egress, but did you work with part of your data set to just maybe perhaps to estimate a model just from the home to Wes without looking at the other end of the trip? Let's say just using the AM data set.
I did have some. In the beginning, I did have some, because they had indications of whether a trip was done in the AM or PM. And in the beginning, I tried, for example, having a PM dummy in there and seeing if I could sort of segment the people who had traveled in the AM versus the PM, and to see if I could tease out any differences there in the variables I was trying. But I didn't find anything that popped out, so I chose not to do that. And also, because my final data set had 730 observations, I didn't really want to, if I would have split that, I also lose a lot of observations. So I decided not to do that. But it could be interesting.
So I know that the ridership on the West hasn't exactly met its forecasts. And so I was wondering, can these sorts of studies be used predictively to help inform ridership forecasts before a line is built, or can they only be done after construction?
Do you mean for example, the type of study that I just did?
Right, these sort of mode access sort of studies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what they, exactly how and what they modeled before they built Wes. But typically, I know that there are access mode studies being done when you're doing, if you're planning a line, and if you need to do, especially for station area planning, you definitely want to know, are you expecting, do you need to put in a bunch of park and ride? Are you expecting people to drive, or are you expecting others? So I don't know if this could necessarily help predict ridership, but, and also this study is of course done when you already have the riders. So I don't know if this would help with that, but it could certainly help with station area planning and just getting to know your current riders in general. And maybe, for example, if you have a lot of walk access, okay, maybe if you make some more improvements or attract some investments to certain of the station areas, maybe that will get even more people to walk who aren't currently considering it.
So then let's go, yeah.
You mentioned, I think, that about a third of the respondents had employer-sponsored passes.
Yeah.
And I was curious, you said that indicated or led you to the conclusion that more of those people were likely to drive than people who didn't have passes. Was there any correlation between the employer-sponsored passes and income, which might also be a major factor?
Yeah, I looked at that because that is, I mean, yeah, very likely incomes are generally higher of people who work in places where their employers are going to offer them passes. But what I did is since I had both variables in the model, I had income and I also had the employer-sponsored passes. And as both of those came out as statistically significant, it means that there wasn't enough of an overlap that one would outdo the other. So both of them were helped provide some explanation on their own. Although, yeah, definitely a lot of pass holders were higher income.
Thank you.
Okay, so here, does your microphone work? That one?
I was wondering if you're able to take into consideration the effects of weather on ridership, especially for those who would walk or bike.
Did you say weather? No. Simply because I didn't have, I didn't have any data for it, and I don't know what it was the day they chose a certain mode. But there wasn't any questions about it, so I couldn't do it. But I think that certainly varies a lot, especially by season, for sure. This survey was actually done in June, so that may help explain more of the walk access. I don't know.
So I was curious, I would like to assume that TriMet might re-administer this survey or something similar. to it. And so I was just curious, besides including a car ownership question, if there are any other types of questions that you would like to see included based on your research results in their follow-up survey to this.
They're actually, TriMet is planning a follow-up survey now that I think they're going to carry out sometime, a West survey that they're going to carry out sometime in the spring. And so the main things that I recommended to them were, well, definitely the car ownership one, and then, as I mentioned, some type of construct to measure people's perceptions of reliability, on how reliable either Wes is or how reliable their access mode is. And those were really the two main things that I thought about. But there might be more as well, and maybe some of the ones, for example, the income one. Unless it's to avoid people, skipping the question, I would definitely, it would be useful if they had more than 3 income categories. For example, if they could have 5. And it's always a matter of space, but if they could fit in something about their household, that would, for example, is it a family, a single household? That would be interesting.
Two last questions. One here and one Carly. Then you can ask questions afterwards. Okay.
You mentioned that ridership is low currently. Do you see that this model could be used to target marketing for like a specific person that uses a specific access mode? Say if there's a lot of bike parking at a station, so they have a lot of room for bicyclists, could they target males? Something like that.
Hey, you there. You might like Wes. One of the ideas of my studies was definitely to, since I did the study for TriMet, and especially for Yvonne Lyon and the others who work in the marketing department, it was one of the ideas was to see, try to look for things that also may be able to at least inspire some of their marketing if they need to know, if they feel like they maybe don't know their West riders enough from what they could get out of just a basic study of their survey. And I think, there are some things that could help targeted marketing. For example, maybe if we had a few more bikers, or maybe there are more bicyclists that would choose to access Wes. Because at least the bike riders out there seem to be fairly avid bike riders, but maybe there are some more that they could target, because we found that they seem to be kind of a distinct group in this survey, even though there were small numbers. And we also, of course, have, we have the comfort appreciation being expressed by the light railing car riders. That may be something that they can pick up in their more kind of direct marketing too. But I also think, especially with the employer-sponsored transit passes, that would be interesting for them to follow up and look at and see how are they able to retain the people who are currently riding Wes and have those employer-sponsored passes. And many of them are accessing by car, but can they retain these people? Can they get these people to maybe access by some other modes? And what's the difference and similarity between those people who are accessing it by car but actually choosing Wes and the other people who currently aren't riding Wes, who are probably car drivers that they would like to target? So those are some things.
Okay, so the last question has been yielded to the woman in the front.
You mentioned the station area features, and you mentioned the number of bus lines and the parking. Was there any other things that you considered?
Yes, I tried. Let's see, what did I try? I tried a whole lot of things, including, for example, employment within 1 mile of the station, because as this is a commuter rail, I think maybe there would be a relationship there. But that didn't show up significant in the model. Population density alone performed better. Let's see. I tried probably many other things, but I can't think of them from the top of my head. But if you have a specific one, you can ask me if I tried it. Well, you can ask me after. Yeah, the population density was in, let's see, where is it?
So we're actually at 1 o'clock. So
Okay.
I'm going to cut off the formal. We can continue an informal conversation afterwards. I'm sure Osa would be willing to. But I do want to put a plug in next week. We actually have Tara Goddard, who's the bicycle coordinator for the city of Davis, though she's going to be talking about bicycling in Korea. So a particular city in Korea. I hope we'll see some of you there. I do have copies of the schedule here on paper if you'd like to grab one as you leave. It's also on our website. So thank you all very much, and thank you in particular, Osa, for presenting today.
So the population density one was in here, and so I saw that stations with higher density had more people walking.